A dimly lit VIP room. A man who runs the Chicago underworld points to the leather seat beside him. Sit beside me and don't move. Most people would tremble. Beatrice just slapped his hand away. What happened next wasn't a tragedy. It was a high-stakes game of survival. The biting January wind off Lake Michigan whipped violently against the windows of the armored Cadillac Escalade. In the back seat, Beatrice Gallagher sat in heavy, suffocating silence. She was not a woman who blended into the shadows. At 240 pounds, Beatrice was a large, imposing woman, carrying her weight with a stubborn dignity that she had painstakingly built over years of being overlooked or underestimated. She was an auditor by trade, a woman who lived in spreadsheets and tax codes, far removed from the violent underbelly of the city. Yet here she was, wearing a hastily thrown-on black trench coat over her pajamas, flanked by two men whose tailored suits failed to hide the unmistakable bulges of shoulder holsters. They had pulled her from her apartment in Lincoln Park 20 minutes ago. No explanations. Just a gruff order to come with them if she wanted her younger brother, Tommy, to live through the night. The SUV pulled into the private underground loading dock of the Lexington Club, a notorious, high-end speakeasy on Rush Street, known to be the fortress of the Morano Syndicate. Beatrice's heart hammered against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat. Her heavy thighs rubbed together as she was ushered out of the vehicle and through the bustling, stainless steel labyrinth of the club's industrial kitchen. Cooks and waitstaff averted their eyes instantly. Nobody looked at the men in suits, and they certainly didn't look at the plus-size woman being marched toward the VIP elevators. The elevator doors chimed and parted, revealing a sprawling, dimly lit penthouse lounge. The air was thick with the scent of Tom Ford Oud Wood cologne, expensive cigar smoke, and the sharp tang of fear. Beatrice was shoved forward. She stumbled slightly, her sensible flats catching on the plush Persian rug, but she caught herself, refusing to fall. She squared her broad shoulders and lifted her chin, taking in the scene. In the center of the room, kneeling on the hardwood floor with his hands zip-tied behind his back, was Tommy. His face was a bruised, swollen mess, his designer shirt torn and stained. Standing over him were three enforcers, but Beatrice's eyes were immediately drawn to the man sitting on the deep leather sofa. Vincent Morano was the undisputed head of the Morano family, a man whose name was whispered in boardroom meetings and police precincts alike. Vincent was in his late 30s, possessing a sharp, aristocratic profile, dark, slicked-back hair, and eyes as cold and grey as the Chicago skyline. I wasn't wearing a jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faded ink. He oozed a terrifying, effortless authority. "Tommy!" Beatrice gasped, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain stoic. She took a step toward her brother, but a massive enforcer stepped in her path, a hand pressing flat against her collarbone to stop her. "Let her through, Richard," Vincent said. His voice was smooth, a low baritone that commanded the room without rising above a conversational volume. The enforcer dropped his hand. Beatrice rushed to her brother, dropping heavily to her knees beside him. She ignored the way her coat strained across her broad back, pulling at the seams. "Tommy, what did you do?" she whispered, her hands hovering over his battered face. "I'm sorry, B," Tommy croaked, spitting a glob of saliva onto the floor. I messed up bad. Messed up. $400,000, Vincent said, leaning forward on the sofa and resting his elbows on his knees. "That is what your brother owes me, Miss Gallagher. He thought he could borrow from my books to fund his delusions of grandeur at the underground poker tables in the South Loop." Beatrice froze. 400,000. It was an impossible sum. She made a modest salary. She had no assets, no rich relatives. Her chest tightened, panic threatening to suffocate her. She turned her head, looking up at Vincent Morano. "I can get a loan," Beatrice said, her voice shaking. "I can pull from my 401k. I can pay you back in installments." Vincent chuckled, a dark, humorless sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "I am not a bank, Miss Gallagher. I do not do payment plans. When someone steals from me, they pay with their lives. It maintains order. But your brother—" Vincent stood up, slowly walking around the glass coffee table until he was towering over her. "Your brother begged. He told me his sister was a brilliant accountant, a fixer of numbers. He offered you to me to wipe the slate clean." Disgust washed over Beatrice. Hot and vile. She looked down at Tommy, who couldn't even meet her eyes. Her own brother had traded her like a piece of livestock to save his own skin. "Stand up," Vincent ordered. Beatrice hesitated, then planted her feet and pushed herself up. She was tall, standing at 5'9", and with her full, heavy figure, she held her ground. She looked Vincent dead in the eye, refusing to shrink herself. She was fat, she was exhausted, and she was done being used by the men in her life. Vincent's cold grey eyes raked over her. He didn't look at her with the usual dismissal she received from wealthy, powerful men. He didn't look past her weight. Instead, his gaze lingered on the curve of her wide hips, the fullness of her chest beneath the coat, the defiant set of her round jaw. There was a dangerous spark of genuine intrigue in his eyes. He had been surrounded by artificial, waif-thin socialites for years. The woman standing before him was soft, substantial, and practically vibrating with suppressed rage. Vincent turned slightly and patted the empty cushion on the leather sofa. "Sit beside me, and don't move," the Mafia boss ordered softly. He reached out, his large, calloused hand moving to grab her wrist and pull her down next to him. The sheer audacity of the command, the absolute arrogance of his touch, snapped the last thread of Beatrice's restraint. Without thinking, operating entirely on years of pent-up frustration and sudden, blinding anger, Beatrice swung her arm. Smack! She slapped his hand away. The sound echoed through the silent penthouse like a gunshot. The room instantly froze. For a span of 3 seconds, the penthouse lounge was dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the HVAC unit and the ragged breathing coming from Tommy on the floor. Beatrice stood frozen, the palm of her hand stinging from the impact. Behind Vincent, the enforcer named Richard immediately reached inside his jacket, the metallic click of a safety being disengaged, cutting through the room. 2 other guards stepped forward, their faces twisted into masks of lethal intent. Beatrice's heart stopped. She had just assaulted the most dangerous man in Illinois. She braced herself for the bullet, squeezing her eyes shut. But the gunshot never came. Instead, a sound far more terrifying filled the room. Vincent Morano was laughing. It started as a low rumble in his chest and erupted into genuine, unrestrained laughter. He held up a hand, snapping his fingers once. The bodyguards froze, slowly sliding their weapons back into their holsters, though their eyes never left Beatrice. Vincent looked at his hand, the skin slightly red where she had struck him, and then looked back up at her. The coldness in his grey eyes had vanished, replaced by a predatory warmth that made Beatrice's stomach flip. No one had dared to strike him in over a decade. And here was this heavy-set accountant, shaking in her coat, possessing more courage than rival bosses twice her size. "Well," Vincent murmured, stepping closer to her. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. "You certainly aren't the meek little sister he described." "I'm not a commodity," Beatrice said, her voice remarkably steady, despite the tremor in her hands. She stood her ground, forcing herself not to step back as his towering frame cast a shadow over her. "You can't just take me to clear a debt. I won't work for a cartel. I'll go to the FBI. "The FBI?" Vincent mused, reaching into the inner pocket of his slacks. He pulled out a sleek, black, encrypted phone and tossed it onto the glass coffee table. "Be my guest. But before you dial, you should understand exactly what kind of mess your brother has dragged you into. It's not a gambling debt, Miss Gallagher." Beatrice frowned, glancing down at Tommy, who was now weeping silently into the hardwood floor. "What are you talking about?" Vincent walked over to a polished mahogany desk in the corner and picked up a manila folder, tossing it onto the sofa. "Open it." Beatrice hesitated, then reached down with trembling fingers. She flipped the folder open. Inside were bank statements, wire transfer logs, and surveillance photographs. Her trained auditor's eyes scanned the spreadsheets immediately. The numbers didn't point to casinos or underground poker rings. They were offshore routed transfers, and the recipient name on the dummy corporations made her blood run cold. "O'Banion Logistics." "Liam O'Banion," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "The head of the Irish syndicate operating out of the South Side. Your brother didn't lose my money in a poker game, Beatrice. He stole it to fund a hit on me. He took a bribe from O'Banion to provide them with the security codes to my West Side shipping warehouses." Beatrice stared at the papers, the truth crashing down on her like an anvil. Tommy hadn't just made a mistake. He had committed treason in the criminal underworld. He had sold out the Morano family and then tried to use her as a human shield when he got caught. The betrayal stung worse than the fear. Her own flesh and blood. "If I kill him," Vincent continued, stepping into her personal space again, "it starts a war with O'Banion before I am ready. If I let him go, I look weak." Vincent reached out, and this time, he didn't try to pull her. He gently brushed a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. The touch was agonizingly tender, a stark contrast to the violence in the room. "But you are an auditor for a firm that handles O'Banion's legitimate front companies. Don't look so surprised. I know everything about you, Beatrice." She swallowed hard. Her firm did handle the taxes for several large construction companies on the South Side. "Here is the new deal," Vincent said, his eyes locking onto hers. "You are going to find where O'Banion is hiding the rest of my stolen money within those legitimate accounts. You are going to dismantle his financial empire from the inside. You work for me now, directly under my protection." "And if I refuse?" she whispered. "Then I put a bullet in Tommy's head right now, and I let O'Banion's men find you," Vincent replied smoothly. "Because Liam O'Banion knows your brother gave up his name. You are a loose end, Beatrice. Out there, you are dead. With me, you are untouchable." Beatrice looked at Tommy, the brother she had practically raised, who had betrayed her so thoroughly. She looked back at Vincent, realizing the terrifying truth. The Mafia boss wasn't just trapping her, he was shielding her. I have conditions, Beatrice said, lifting her chin. Vincent raised an eyebrow, clearly amused and utterly captivated by her audacity. Name them. Tommy leaves Chicago tonight. He goes to Europe and never comes back, she demanded, her voice gaining strength. And I don't get treated like a prisoner. I do the work, you clear the debt, and then I walk away. Vincent's gaze lingered on her full lips, then swept over her curvy, substantial frame. A dark, possessive smirk played at the corner of his mouth. He knew she wouldn't walk away. He wouldn't let her. He had finally found something real in a city built on lies. Agreed, Vincent lied smoothly. Richard, get the rat to the O'Hare tarmac. Put him on a cargo plane to Dublin. As the guards dragged a protesting Tommy out of the room, Vincent placed a heavy, warm hand on the small of Beatrice's back. The heat of his touch seeped through her coat. Come, Beatrice, the boss murmured, guiding her toward the private elevator. We have a lot of work to do, and you're going to need a much better dress. For the next 3 weeks, Beatrice Gallagher's life transformed into a surreal, high-stakes game of corporate espionage. She was relocated from her modest apartment to a sprawling guest suite in Vincent Morano's Gold Coast penthouse. 2 heavily armed guards escorted her everywhere, though she spent most of her time holed up in a makeshift office Vincent had built for her, overlooking Lake Michigan. Surrounded by towering stacks of financial records, decrypted hard drives, and glowing monitors, Beatrice hunted for the ghost of Liam O'Banion's fortune. She was brilliant at it. Where others saw numbers, Beatrice saw narratives. She traced the $400,000 her brother stole through a labyrinth of shell corporations, ultimately finding it nestled within the accounts of Southside Apex Contracting, a supposedly legitimate construction firm audited by her own employer. But she found far more than Vincent's stolen money. She found a massive, sprawling money-laundering syndicate that involved corrupt city aldermen, real estate kickbacks, and international shipping fraud. Vincent spent hours in her office, leaning against the doorframe, watching her work. He brought her black coffee from a local roaster on Oak Street and listened intently as she dismantled his rival's empire on a spreadsheet. He never belittled her intelligence. He never looked at her with the condescending pity she was so used to receiving from men in the corporate world. When he looked at her, his steel-grey eyes burned with a profound, terrifying respect. O'Banion is moving his assets, Beatrice announced on a freezing Thursday evening, pushing her heavy-rimmed glasses up the bridge of her nose. She turned her leather chair to face Vincent, who was pouring 2 glasses of Macallan 18. He knows someone is sniffing around the Apex accounts. He's liquidating his real estate holdings through a charity foundation. They are hosting a massive gala tomorrow night at the Palmer House Hilton to finalize the transfers under the guise of philanthropic donations. Vincent handed her a crystal tumbler, his fingers brushing against hers. The brief contact sent a jolt of electricity up her arm. "Then we attend the gala," he said simply, taking a sip of his scotch. "We force his hand before the ink dries on those transfers." "I can't go to a high society gala, Vincent," Beatrice sighed, looking down at her sensible slacks and oversized cardigan. A familiar wave of insecurity washed over her. "I don't fit into those rooms. I don't wear a size 4. People like Liam O'Banion and his socialite friends will look at me and see a target." Vincent set his glass down on her desk with a sharp clink. The air in the room suddenly grew dense, heavy with his shifting mood. He stepped into her space, placing his hands on the armrests of her chair, trapping her. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You will never speak about yourself that way in my presence again," Vincent growled, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made her breath hitch. "You are not a target. You are the smartest woman in Chicago, and you hold the lifeblood of the Irish syndicate in the palm of your hand. You have curves that demand worship, Beatrice, not apologies. Tomorrow night, you will walk into that ballroom, and every man in the room will envy me." The next evening, Beatrice stared at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of her suite, entirely speechless. Vincent had sent a team of elite stylists from the Magnificent Mile to prepare her. She was wearing a custom-tailored, deep emerald green velvet gown that hugged every curve of her heavy, lush figure. The bodice was structured, lift and supporting her chest while cinching her waist, allowing the heavy fabric to drape elegantly over her wide hips and thick thighs. Her dark hair was swept up into an intricate, cascading updo, and a string of authentic Cartier diamonds rested against her collarbone. For the first time in her life, she didn't look like the background character. She looked like a queen. When she stepped off the elevator into the penthouse foyer, Vincent was waiting. He wore a midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo that accentuated his broad shoulders. When he saw her, he literally stopped breathing. The notorious Mafia boss, a man who commanded legions, stood frozen in absolute reverence. "Beautiful," he murmured, crossing the marble floor to offer his arm. "Utterly magnificent." The Palmer House Hilton ballroom was a sea of glittering chandeliers, flowing champagne, and dangerous secrets. The moment Vincent and Beatrice walked through the gilded doors, the music seemed to dull. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Vincent Morano had entered enemy territory, and he had done it with a breathtaking, substantial woman on his arm, whom nobody recognized. Beatrice held her head high, keeping her hand resting lightly on Vincent's muscular forearm. She channeled his confidence, refusing to shrink herself. "Smile, mia cara," Vincent whispered against her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. "O'Banion is at 3 o'clock, and he looks terrified." Liam O'Banion was a red-faced, barrel-chested man in his 50s, wearing a tuxedo that strained against his gut. He flanked himself with 4 enormous bodyguards, but as Beatrice and Vincent approached the bar, O'Banion intercepted them, his eyes darting nervously. "Morano," O'Banion spat, his fake, polite smile not reaching his cold blue eyes. "Bold of you to crash my charity event." "I'm a charitable man, Liam," Vincent replied smoothly, his tone laced with lethal amusement. "I wanted to introduce you to my new chief financial officer, Miss Beatrice Gallagher." O'Banion's face drained of color. He recognized the last name immediately. He looked at Beatrice, his expression twisting into an ugly sneer. "Gallagher. So this is the fat cow Tommy offered up to save his own miserable skin. You should have stayed in the shadows, sweetheart. Your brother dug a grave you're about to fall into." Before O'Banion could blink, Vincent moved. It happened with terrifying, fluid speed. Vincent grabbed O'Banion by the lapels of his tuxedo and slammed him violently against the mahogany bar. Glass shattered as champagne flutes tumbled to the floor. The music abruptly stopped. O'Banion's bodyguards reached for their concealed weapons, but Vincent's enforcers, who had melted into the crowd moments earlier, already had the cold muzzles of suppressed pistols pressed flush against the Irishman's ribs. The ballroom erupted into panicked gasps, but nobody ran. They were all complicit in the underworld's games, frozen in place, like deer in headlights. "Look at me, Liam," Vincent hissed, his voice carrying through the dead, silent room. His forearm was pressed crushing against O'Banion's windpipe. "If you ever disrespect her again, I will cut out your tongue and feed it to the stray dogs in the South Loop. But you won't live long enough to make that mistake." "You're dead, Morano," O'Banion choked out, his face turning purple. "My men." "Your men are currently being raided by the FBI, the IRS, and the DEA simultaneously," Beatrice interrupted. Her voice rang out, clear, authoritative, and completely devoid of fear. O'Banion's eyes snapped to her, wide with disbelief. Beatrice stepped forward, the emerald velvet of her dress swishing around her legs. She looked down at the crumbling crime boss. 15 minutes ago, I authorized an automated data dump. Every falsified ledger, every offshore wire transfer, every bribe paid to aldermen. Davis and Judge Harrison has been sent directly to the federal prosecutor's secure server. I didn't just find Vincent's money, Mr. O'Banion. I found everything. Your accounts are frozen. Your legitimate fronts are being padlocked right now. You have no empire left. The color completely vanished from O'Banion's face. He was ruined. The invincible Irish syndicate had been meticulously dismantled by an auditor with a laptop. "Let him go, Vincent," Beatrice said softly, placing a gentle hand on Vincent's tense shoulder. "He's a ghost now." Vincent's chest heaved. He stared into O'Banion's terrified eyes for 1 second longer before shoving the man away in disgust. O'Banion collapsed onto the marble floor, coughing and gasping for air as his bodyguards abandoned him, realizing their payroll had just evaporated. Sirens began to wail in the distance, echoing off the downtown skyscrapers. The feds were coming for Liam O'Banion. Vincent turned to Beatrice. The violence in his eyes melted away, replaced by an overwhelming, consuming heat. Without a word to the stunned socialites watching them, he grabbed her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, and led her out of the ballroom, down the grand staircase, and out into the freezing Chicago night. They didn't speak until they were safely in the back of the armored Escalade, speeding down Lake Shore Drive toward the penthouse. The adrenaline was finally beginning to crash, leaving Beatrice shaking slightly. She looked out the window at the dark, churning waters of Lake Michigan. "The debt is cleared," Beatrice whispered, the reality of the situation settling over her. "Your money is safe, and your rival is gone. I did what you asked." "You did," Vincent agreed. The SUV was dark, the only light coming from the passing street lamps illuminating the sharp angles of his face. "So I guess I'm free to go back to my life," she said, her chest tightening painfully. She didn't want to go back to her tiny apartment. She didn't want to go back to being invisible. No. The single word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Vincent slid across the leather seat, closing the distance between them. He reached out, his large hands cupping her face, forcing her to look at him. "I told you on the first night we met," Vincent murmured, his thumbs gently tracing her cheekbones. "When someone steals from me, they pay with their lives. Tommy stole my money. He gave you to me as payment. You belong to me, Beatrice." "I am not property," she argued, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "You are my partner," Vincent corrected fiercely. "You are my equal. You stood in a room full of wolves tonight and brought the biggest one to his knees. I don't want a trophy wife, Beatrice. I want a queen who can run this city by my side." He leaned in closer, his breath ghosting over her lips. "I want you." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of fire and gravity. Beatrice gasped, her hands instinctively coming up to grip the lapels of his tuxedo as he pulled her heavy body flush against his hard chest. He kissed her with a desperate, consuming hunger, groaning softly as she parted her lips, letting him taste her. All the fear, the anger, the tension of the last 3 weeks ignited into a blinding inferno. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. Vincent rested his forehead against hers, his eyes dark with a promise of a completely new life. "Stay," he ordered, though this time it sounded like a plea. Beatrice looked at the ruthless mafia boss who had seen her worth when the rest of the world looked away. She smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that lit up the dark vehicle. "Only if I get to manage the books," she whispered. Vincent laughed, pulling her back into his arms. The city of Chicago flew by outside the windows, but inside, a new empire was just beginning. The line between captivity and loyalty is a razor's edge, but Beatrice didn't just walk that line. She owned it, from a dismissed plus-size accountant to the queen of the Chicago underworld. She proved that true power comes from intelligence and unapologetic confidence. If you were captivated by Beatrice and Vincent's explosive enemies to lovers story, smash that like button. Share this video with your fellow romance drama lovers, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, high-stakes storytelling.